There was one word no one had ever heard him say. No, not to his manager, not to his friends, not to his family, not even to strangers. Whenever someone asked for help, he smiled. Of course. When a colleague wanted him to stay late, no problem. When friends change the plans at the last minute, that's fine. When relatives ask for another favor, I'll take care of it. People admired him. He's so reliable, so generous, so easy to work with. His phone was always ringing. Not because people wanted to know how he was, but because they knew he would never refuse. At first, it felt good. Being needed gave him purpose. Being dependable earned respect. Being available made him feel important. Then, almost without noticing, his own plans began disappearing. He canceled dinners he had been looking forward to, postponed vacations, ignored hobbies, missed birthdays, delayed dreams. Each sacrifice seemed small, but together they quietly reshaped his life. One Saturday morning, he arrived at a family gathering nearly 2 hours late, not because he wanted to. On the way there, he had helped a colleague finish an urgent presentation. The same colleague who had interrupted his weekends countless times before. His family greeted him warmly. His mother smiled. "We knew you'd come." His sister laughed. "You always do." The words sounded kind, yet something about them felt strangely heavy. Not because they were wrong, because they were expected. For the first time, he wondered whether people appreciated his kindness, or simply depended on his predictability. Later that afternoon, after another relative asked him to solve yet another problem, he quietly left the house. He needed air. The city park was unusually peaceful. Children played beneath tall trees. An elderly couple shared a newspaper. Joggers passed along quiet paths. He sat alone on a wooden bench, overlooking a small pond. For several minutes, he enjoyed saying nothing, doing nothing. Then a calm voice broke the silence. "You look exhausted." An elderly man sat at the opposite end of the bench. The young man smiled politely. "It's been a busy week." The old man nodded. "Busy doing what?" He laughed. "Helping people." "And who helped you?" The question arrived so naturally that it caught him completely off guard. "I don't really need help." "Interesting." The old man looked across the pond. "People who say that usually need it the most." Silence. A duck drifted slowly across the water. The young man watched the ripples spread outward. "I just don't like disappointing people." The old man smiled gently. "So instead, you disappoint yourself." The words struck harder than he expected. He immediately wanted to disagree. But memories surfaced before the arguments did. The concert he had missed. The holiday he had canceled. The weekend course he never attended. The evenings he had promised to spend resting, only to spend them solving someone else's problems. The old man quietly continued. "Tell me, when was the last time you said no, even though you wanted to?" The young man searched his memory. Days, weeks, months. Nothing came. He couldn't remember. The old man slowly stood. He brushed a few fallen leaves from his coat. "My name," he said calmly, "is Friedrich Nietzsche." The park remained peaceful. Children continued laughing. People continued asking favors of one another. But for the first time, the young man realized something unsettling. Perhaps the most expensive word he had never spoken contained only 2 letters. No. The wind gently moved through the trees. The pond remained perfectly still. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The young man finally broke the silence. "I don't understand. Isn't helping people a good thing?" Nietzsche smiled. "It can be. But goodness becomes dangerous when it grows from fear instead of choice." The young man frowned. "Fear! I don't help people because I'm afraid." The philosopher looked at him calmly. "Then answer one question. What happens inside you when someone looks disappointed?" The young man immediately knew the feeling. A knot in his stomach. Guilt. An almost irresistible urge to fix everything, even when the problem wasn't his. He looked down. "I don't like it." Nietzsche nodded. "Exactly. So sometimes You are not saying yes because someone needs your help. You are saying yes because you need their approval. The words landed heavily. The young man wanted to reject them, yet every memory that came to mind quietly supported them. He remembered accepting projects he didn't have time for, not because they mattered, because he couldn't bear hearing. I thought I could count on you. He remembered lending money he couldn't afford to lose, agreeing to invitations he desperately wanted to decline, changing his opinions simply to avoid uncomfortable conversations. Each decision had looked generous from the outside. Inside, something very different had been happening. Nietzsche slowly stood and began walking along the narrow path beside the pond. The young man followed. They passed a large willow tree whose branches almost touched the water. The philosopher stopped beneath it. Look at this tree. The young man looked up. Its branches bent gracefully with the wind. It survives because it can bend. Nietzsche said quietly, but imagine if it bent in every direction, for every passing breeze. The young man smiled faintly. It would eventually break. Exactly, the philosopher replied. So, why do people admire that behavior in themselves? Silence settled between them. The young man suddenly saw the pattern. Every request, every favor, every expectation. He had adjusted himself to all of them, little by little, until he no longer knew what shape he had originally been. They continued walking. Ahead of them, a small boy was building a sandcastle beside the edge of the pond. Another child accidentally kicked part of it over. The boy looked upset, then calmly said, "No, please don't do that." The second child apologized. Together, they rebuilt the castle. Nietzsche watched without speaking. The young man looked puzzled. What was I supposed to notice? The philosopher smiled. The child protected what mattered, without hating the other child. The young man remained silent. For years, he had believed saying no automatically meant being selfish, or rude, or uncaring. Yet the child had done something entirely different. He had simply drawn a boundary, without anger, without guilt, without apology. Nietzsche turned toward him. There is something curious about people. They spend years building a house called character. He paused. Then they leave every door unlocked. Because they're afraid someone might think they are unfriendly. The sentence echoed inside him. How many times had he allowed others to enter his time, his energy, his peace, simply because closing the door felt uncomfortable? The philosopher continued. Compassion without boundaries eventually becomes resentment. The young man stopped walking. That word, resentment, he recognized it immediately, not toward strangers, toward the very people he had spent years trying to please. He had secretly begun blaming them, when in truth, very few had ever forced him. Most had simply asked. He had answered every single time. The park slowly emptied as evening approached. Golden sunlight filtered through the trees. Nietzsche looked toward the path ahead. The hardest word is not no. He paused. It is accepting that someone may think less of you. After hearing it, the young man felt something shift. Perhaps real kindness had never meant saying yes to everyone. Perhaps it meant becoming honest enough to stop saying yes when every part of him was already whispering no. The following Monday, nothing extraordinary happened. The city woke as it always did. Traffic filled the streets. Emails arrived. Meetings began. The world expected him to be exactly who he had always been. By lunchtime, his phone rang. A colleague's name appeared on the screen. He already knew the request before answering. "Hey, I know it's short notice, but could you stay late again tonight?" For years, his response had always arrived before the question was finished. Of course. This time, he remained silent, not because he was angry, not because he wanted revenge, simply because, for the first time, he was listening to a voice he had ignored for years, his own. He looked at the family photo on his desk. He remembered promising his younger sister he would attend her birthday dinner, a promise he had already postponed twice. He took a slow breath. "I'm sorry. I can't tonight." Silence. Only a few seconds. Yet it felt longer than many years. His colleague finally replied, "Okay, I'll figure something out. The call ended. That was all. No argument. No disaster. No rejection. The world had not collapsed. He sat quietly for a moment, waiting for the guilt he knew so well. It arrived, but something else arrived with it. Relief. Not because he had refused someone, because he had finally stopped refusing himself. That evening, he returned to the park. The pond reflected the golden colors of the setting sun. Children were still playing. The old willow tree still bent gently with the wind. Nietzsche stood exactly where they had spoken before. The young man smiled. I said no. Nietzsche looked at him. And I survived. The philosopher laughed softly. So did everyone else. They walked together beneath the trees. The young man thought about how many years he had imagined saying no would destroy relationships. Instead, it had only destroyed an illusion, the illusion that he had earned the right to be loved. Nietzsche stopped beside the pond. Most people believe boundaries keep others out. He looked across the still water. They forget. Boundaries also protect what is precious inside. The young man watched the ripples spread across the pond. For years, he had believed generosity meant giving until nothing remained. Now he understood something different. You cannot continually pour water from an empty cup. Sooner or later, there is nothing left to give. The philosopher reached down and picked up a smooth stone. He held it in his palm. If this stone belongs to everyone, it belongs to no one. He gently placed it back on the ground. The same is true of your time, your attention, your life. The evening air grew cooler. The park slowly became quiet. People returned home. The young man realized something that had never occurred to him before. Every time he had said yes while meaning no, he had told the world a small lie, not about the request, about himself. Nietzsche began walking toward the park exit, just before disappearing beyond the trees. He turned one final time. Do not measure your kindness. He paused. By how much of yourself you are willing to lose. Another silence. Then he continued. Measure it by whether your generosity is still a choice, or whether it has become a fear disguised as virtue. The philosopher disappeared into the fading light. The young man remained beside the pond. The world would still ask for his time tomorrow, his energy, his attention, his help. Sometimes he would gladly say yes. Sometimes he would calmly say no, not because he cared less about other people, but because he had finally learned that protecting his own life did not make him selfish. It made his kindness honest. And perhaps the strongest people are not those who always know how to sacrifice. They are the ones who finally learn which parts of themselves should never be given away.